That's the word that rose in my chest before I could make sense of it. The land was too quiet. No rustling, no workers, no distant chatter. Just stillness. And my mother-in-law, Evelyn, stood on the front porch with a look I couldn't immediately read. Not sadness. Not joy. Something between guilt and discomfort, as though she was holding a secret in her hands and trying to keep it from spilling. "Glad you're back," she said. Her voice was clipped, not warm like someone who had been praying for your recovery. I hugged her anyway, the way I always did. Or tried to. Her arms barely lifted. I didn't question it then. I was too exhausted, too relieved to be home. The doctors had said it would take months to fully regain my strength, and they weren't lying. Every step felt like wading through thick sand. Inside, the house smelled different. Clean but not lived in. As though someone had cleaned the surfaces, but hadn't sat long enough to leave warmth behind. I sat on the couch, catching my breath, and Daniel brought me water. His hands trembled just a little when he set the glass down. He didn't think I noticed, but after 10 years of marriage, you learn the language of someone's silence. "Where's Alina?" I asked, trying to adjust my stiff legs. Our daughter was usually the first to rush toward me. "At school," Daniel said quickly. I didn't want to interrupt her exams. I nodded, accepting the explanation. It made sense. But even then, before the storm, something inside me whispered. "They're hiding something from you." I brushed the thought away. Before all of this, before the hospital, before the betrayal that would nearly break me, life was simple. Not perfect, no. But simple. That was the first thought that crossed my mind the day I was discharged. It wasn't dramatic, not like the movies where someone faints or collapses from the shock of truth. It was quieter than that, a slow, sinking heaviness, like standing on a boat that suddenly stops moving. After 3 months in a hospital bed, hooked up to 4 drips and prayers, I expected the world outside to feel foreign. But I didn't expect my own life to feel like someone had rearranged it while I wasn't looking. My husband, Daniel, was the one who came to pick me up. He looked thinner, somehow older, with a tiredness behind his eyes he didn't bother hiding. He greeted me with a weak smile and a soft, "Let's take you home, love." Home. I repeated the word in my mind, tasting the memory of it. The smell of warm rice in the afternoons. The sound of chickens rustling near the kitchen window. The gentle sway of the mango tree I had planted the year we married. Our house wasn't large. It wasn't modern. But it was mine, ours, made from years of saving, planning, and sacrificing. And a big part of that sacrifice was our farmland. 12 acres of ancestral soil passed down through Daniel's side of the family. It had belonged to his late father, then to Daniel and his brother, but his brother moved overseas years ago and left the land in our care. I didn't farm it myself, but that land was our safety net. When our daughter, Alina, needed school fees, the land provided. When the roof leaked during monsoon season, the land carried us through. We leased it out to a farmer who shared part of the harvest with us. That land wasn't just property. It was security. History. Family. It was my reassurance that even if life broke down, we had somewhere to start again. So when Daniel drove through the gate and I looked toward the backyard, toward the spot where the farmland started just beyond the trees, something felt wrong. Daniel worked as a mechanic at a repair shop 2 villages away. I managed the home and helped tutor children in the afternoons to bring in extra money. Alina was 9, still young enough to tell me everything about her day, but old enough to form opinions that made me laugh sometimes. And Evelyn, well, she was complicated. My mother-in-law lived with us since Daniel's father passed away. She had always been protective of her sons, especially Daniel, the younger one. She was the type of woman who folded clothes twice, even if they were already folded perfectly. The type who cleaned a clean kitchen because you never know who might visit. She wasn't cruel, just demanding. Controlling in quiet ways. She liked things done the way she liked them done. If I washed the dishes, she would rewash the ones she thought weren't rinsed enough. If I seasoned the chicken, she would add more salt the moment I turned my back. Sometimes it annoyed me, but most days I accepted it. She was family, and family is not something you throw away over small things. But money was her pressure point. Evelyn loved security the way some people love jewelry. She counted coins twice, kept receipts in a drawer organized by date, and never liked the idea of spending beyond the bare minimum. So when I fell sick, when my body betrayed me and the doctor's words became a blur, I remember her face paling, not out of fear for my life but fear of the bills. I don't blame her for being scared. Knowing what came later, I blame her for something else entirely. It started with dizziness. I ignored it at first, blaming the summer heat or skipping breakfast. Then came the fainting spells. Then the rapid weight loss. Daniel begged me to see a doctor. I brushed him off. Just tired, I said. Until the day I collapsed while washing rice. The doctor at our small local clinic sent us to the district hospital immediately. They ran tests and the diagnosis came back: severe anemia, dangerously low blood pressure, and internal complications that required long-term treatment. Her body needs rest and monitoring, the doctor told Daniel. She must stay admitted. I remember Daniel squeezing my hand. Evelyn standing in the corner, arms crossed tightly. Hospital stay, she asked the doctor. For how long? As long as it takes, he replied gently. She's lucky she came when she did. Lucky. Funny how life uses that word. The first week was a blur for drips, nurses adjusting pillows, and the beeping sound of machines. Daniel visited every day before and after work. Alina came on weekends, carrying handmade cards and little notes. Evelyn visited less often, but when she did, she always asked the same question. How much will this cost? At the time, I didn't think much of it. I was too sick to think much of anything. But somewhere between week 5 and week 7, her visits grew even less frequent. Daniel explained it away. He said she was managing things at home, cooking, helping with Alina. I believed him. I had no reason not to. Little did I know, while I was fighting for my life, Evelyn was making decisions that would cost me far more than money. She was making decisions that would shape the fate I had no idea was coming. And by the time I discovered the truth, it was too late. Or so she thought. That's what everyone tells you after a long hospital stay: rest, don't think too much, just focus on healing, leave the stress for later. But how do you rest when the air in your own home feels different? For the first few days, I tried to ignore it. Daniel fussed over me more than usual, adjusting pillows, bringing warm soup, encouraging me to sleep. He never left his phone unattended, but I chalked that up to work. Evelyn moved around the house quietly, too quietly. She spoke to me only when necessary, and even then, her voice carried an impatience that felt misplaced. But she cooked for me, made sure I had tea, and stayed out of my way. Still, something was off. It started with little things. A farmer named Mr. Hahn came by on my 3rd day back. He had leased our farmland for years, a kind man with weathered hands, and a voice like gravel. He stopped by the porch, hat in hand, expecting to speak with Daniel. Evelyn met him before any of us could. What do you need? She asked sharply. Mr. Hahn hesitated. Just wanted to drop off the end-of-season report. And the remaining share from the harvest. I heard this from the living room. The door was open, and the sound carried in. Evelyn's tone softened noticeably, almost rehearsed. Oh, no need, no need. We already settled that. Daniel and I agreed it was better if you held on to it this time. Mr. Hahn went silent. I frowned. When had she and Daniel discussed anything of that sort? Then I heard her footsteps, fast, decisive. She walked toward him, lowered her voice, and added. And don't trouble her with these things. She's recovering. My recovering brain tried to give her the benefit of the doubt. Maybe she didn't want me stressed. Maybe she meant well. But something about the way she said it, firm, controlling, tugged at the back of my mind. That was the first ripple. The second came 3 days later. I was seated near the window, trying to read, when I noticed two men standing near the boundary line of our property. They wore formal clothes, not local farmers, not surveyors from the village. One held a clipboard. I leaned forward, squinting, watching them gesture toward the far end of the land. Something about their posture made goosebumps rise on my arms. I called out to Daniel, who was fixing something in the kitchen. "There are men by the farmland," I said. "Do you know who they are?" He didn't look up. Didn't even pause his movements. "Probably just checking the irrigation lines," he said quickly. I almost believed him. Except irrigation workers don't wear polished shoes or carry folders. I stood, shaky but determined, and walked to the window again. But by then, the men were gone. The moment dissolved like smoke. And then came the third clue, the one I couldn't ignore. The missing folder. One afternoon, while Daniel was at work and Evelyn had taken Alina to school, I went to our room to find my medical documents. The doctor had told me to review them before my follow-up visit. We kept all important papers, land deeds, receipts, contracts, in one metal box under the bed. I pulled it out, coughing from the dust. The lock clicked open easily. Inside, everything looked organized. Too organized. Files that used to be stuffed in without order now set neatly aligned by size. Documents in new envelopes. Labels written in Evelyn's handwriting. She had gone through our things. I told myself it was harmless, maybe she just tidied up. But something told me to look deeper. I opened the folder labeled Farmland, Ownership and Lease Papers. It was almost empty. The copies of our lease agreement with Mr. Hahn. Gone. The old tax documents. Gone. The binder that held the original deed. Gone. My heart thudded painfully. I searched the rest of the box. Nothing. Confusion swirled first. Then fear. Then anger. They must have moved it, I reasoned. That made sense. Maybe Daniel placed it elsewhere for safekeeping. I wanted to believe that so badly. That evening, when Daniel returned home, I waited until Evelyn went to her room before gently asking, "Did you move the farmland papers?" He froze. It was a tiny pause, less than a second, but I saw it. The stillness of guilt. The kind you can't hide from someone who knows you too well. He recovered quickly. Yeah. Yes, I did. I put them in the cabinet in the living room. But he didn't look at me when he said it. And he didn't ask the obvious question, why? Why was I looking for them? Why did I ask? He just waited for me to drop the subject. I nodded, pretending to accept the answer. But that knot in my stomach tightened. Later that night, after the house fell quiet, I checked the living room cabinet. Empty. Not even a single envelope. Daniel had lied. And now I knew, without a doubt, that something was very, very wrong. The conversation I wasn't meant to hear. The most painful clues in life often arrive accidentally. I had gotten up to drink water past midnight, when I heard muffled voices coming from the veranda. Daniel and Evelyn. My name floated in the air, not loudly, but clear enough to freeze my steps. "She'll find out eventually," Daniel whispered. Evelyn hissed sharply. "Not now. She just came home. Stress will make her sick again." "So what do? We keep quiet. She won't check the land for a while. By then, it won't matter." My breath tangled in my throat. By then, it won't matter. My hands trembled. Something had happened. Something they were hiding. Something involving the farmland. I stepped back, barely breathing, afraid the wooden floor would creak. And as I returned to the bedroom, heart pounding, the truth started forming in my mind. Not the full truth, not yet. But enough to send a cold wave through my veins. They had done something behind my back. While I was in the hospital. While I was helpless. They had done something to my land. That night, I barely slept. The seed of suspicion had sprouted into something uglier, fear, betrayal, uncertainty, and it kept me awake until dawn. And dawn brought the moment that shattered everything. Because the next day, I found out exactly what they had done. And the truth was worse than anything I could have imagined. For a week after I returned home, life moved carefully, like everyone was afraid to breathe too loudly. Daniel hovered over me with a tenderness that felt rehearsed. Evelyn watched me constantly, not with concern, but with caution, as though she were waiting for me to ask a question she wasn't prepared to answer. And I tried to settle back into the rhythm of a home that no longer felt like mine. But the cracks were everywhere. Small at first. Easy to dismiss. But cracks, no matter how fine, always widen if you look closely enough. The first crack. 3 days after coming home, I asked Daniel about the farmland. It was an innocent moment. Late afternoon. Light drifting through the curtains. I was sitting on the edge of the bed, trying to thread a needle for the first time in months. Daniel, I said, glancing up, who's managing the land now? It seemed empty. His reaction was too fast. Too sharp. Oh, it's nothing, he said, waving a hand. The lessee changed. That's all. He's repairing the tool shed. He didn't meet my eyes. I didn't push. But the needle slipped from my fingers. The second crack. 2 days later, I overheard Evelyn speaking in hushed tones outside my door. I told you she would notice, she whispered angrily. Daniel's voice was low. Please, Ma, not now. You should have told her before bringing her home. It's her right to. Ma, Daniel snapped, lower your voice. I leaned closer to the door. A board creaked beneath my foot. Silence followed, quick, guilty silence, and then the sound of Evelyn walking away. Daniel entered a moment later carrying a bowl of soup. His smile trembled just slightly. Another crack. Alina's slip. That weekend, Alina finally sat beside me long enough for a real conversation. She laid her head on my lap, tracing patterns on my arm. Mama, she said softly, are you going back to the hospital again? Not if I can help it, I joked. She didn't smile. Instead she asked, if someone sells something that's not theirs, is that stealing? My heart dropped. What do you mean? I asked carefully. She looked toward the living room, toward her father and grandmother, then back at me. Nothing, she said quickly. Forget it. But children don't ask questions like that without reason. A crack that wasn't small anymore. The ledger. The truth didn't come all at once. It arrived in pieces. On the 8th day after my return, I decided to do something small, look through the household ledger I kept before falling sick. It was a binder I maintained religiously, noting expenses, harvest revenues, lease agreements, and household budgets. I found it lying on a shelf. When I opened it, my fingertips went cold. Several pages were missing. Not ripped out, removed carefully with a blade. I flipped through again, slower, my pulse pounding harder with each turn. All the pages related to land revenues, lease contracts, savings, property tax receipts were gone. My breath hitched. Someone didn't want me to see the numbers. Someone wanted to erase a trail. I closed the ledger and stared at the wall, the weight of dread pressing against my ribs. Not long after, I heard footsteps. Evelyn appeared in the doorway. Why are you out of bed? I held up the ledger. Some pages are missing. A flicker of panic crossed her face, so fast it might have been imagined if I didn't know her so well. You shouldn't tire yourself, she said curtly. Daniel and I have been managing everything. It's not your concern right now. Not my concern. My concern. My land. My home. My life. Her voice was too firm, too final. She turned to leave. Evelyn, I called, stopping her. She paused, shoulders stiff. Did something happen while I was in the hospital? She didn't turn around when she answered. No, she said coldly. Nothing happened. And it's better if you stop asking. The warning. That night, after everyone had gone to sleep, I lay awake listening to the house breathe. Listening to myself breathe. Trying to make sense of the fear knotting inside me. Then I heard it, faint rustling outside my window. A silhouette moved quietly across the yard, near the boundary where our farmland used to stretch. Not a thief. Not an animal. A man. Carrying tools. Measuring something. On our land. On land that was supposed to be untouched. My throat tightened. Someone had sold something. Or given something away. Or taken something that didn't belong to them. The next morning, I confronted Daniel. Daniel, I said quietly, tell me the truth. What happened to the land while I was in the hospital? His face went pale. His hands trembled. And before he could open his mouth, Evelyn's voice cut through the room like a blade. It's done. And it cannot be undone. The world around me stilled. What's done? I whispered. But the answer was already rising inside me. A tidal wave of realization. A roar of betrayal. Daniel bowed his head. Evelyn stared without remorse. And I understood. I understood everything. But I needed to hear the words. I needed to hear him say it. Daniel, I whispered, voice cracking, what did you do? He swallowed hard. And finally, he said it. The truth that shattered everything I thought I knew about my marriage, my family, my home, and the people I trusted with my life. We sold the land. We sold the land. The words didn't hit all at once. They landed slowly, like stones dropping into deep water, sinking long before I could feel the ripples. For a moment the room was silent. Even the morning itself seemed to pause, sunlight caught mid-beam, dust floating mid-air, waiting for my reaction. I didn't speak. I couldn't. I simply looked at Daniel, the man I had loved for 10 years, the man who held my hand through sickness and shared whispered dreams with me on quiet nights. He looked away. Why? I finally managed. The word was barely a breath. He didn't answer. Instead, Evelyn stepped forward, her voice sharp with false authority. Because we had no choice, she said. Your treatment was draining every last rupee. We did what we needed to do to survive. To survive, I repeated softly. So you sold everything? Evelyn lifted her chin. You should be grateful. If we hadn't acted quickly, you wouldn't even be here. Grateful. That word made something in me crack. I turned back to Daniel. Is that true? Was it only for medical bills? Silence. A long, guilty silence. Daniel. His shoulders dropped. His voice came out hollow. It started that way, he whispered. But after the first few months, there were other things too. My stomach twisted. What other things? Evelyn stepped in again, as if she couldn't bear to let him confess his own sin. Your daughter's school fees. The new repairs. Debt. Life doesn't stop just because you're lying in a hospital bed. Debt? I whispered. Daniel flinched. Evelyn shot him a warning glare, but I saw it. I saw him shrink under it, the way a grown man shouldn't shrink. Daniel, I said slowly, what debt? His voice was barely audible. The shop. The mechanic shop. I made a bad investment. And I didn't want you to worry. A sound escaped me, something between a laugh and a gasp. So you didn't want me to worry, I said shakily, so you sold the only thing keeping us standing. The land belonged to Daniel's side of the family, Evelyn snapped. Not yours. He had every right. Every right. The words stung more than the betrayal. My daughter's future is on that land, I said. My home is built around that land. I spent 10 years helping manage it. How dare you say it's not mine? Evelyn's eyes hardened. Everything you managed because we allowed it. Don't make yourself bigger than you are. It was so quick, the cruelty. So precise. So practiced. I stared at her as the truth unraveled like thread. This was never about survival. This was never just about bills. This was about power. Control. Convenience. They didn't sell the land because they had to. They sold it because it was easier than facing their own mistakes. They sold it because I wasn't there to stop them. And maybe, just maybe, because Evelyn had always wanted it gone, far from someone she never fully accepted into her family. I felt a sharp pain in my chest, not physical but deep, tearing. Daniel, I said again, quieter this time, tell me the truth. All of it. He swallowed hard. He finally met my eyes. I didn't want to, he said. I fought her at first. But then everything spiraled. The shop, the debts, the hospital bills. I thought I could fix it before you came home. I thought I could get it back. I stared at him, numb. And did you? His silence was my answer. I sank into the nearest chair because my legs refused to hold me. The buyer? I whispered. Who is it? Maybe we can undo. You can't, Evelyn interjected quickly. It's gone. Papers signed. Money spent. Done. The finality in her tone was a slap. I felt a tremor run through me, not from weakness but from fury. Unexpected, quiet, rising fury. I looked at Daniel one last time. Why didn't you tell me? I asked. He covered his face with his hands. Because I thought you'd break. I let out a hollow laugh. Daniel, this broke me more than the illness ever could. The final blow. What's done is done, Evelyn said briskly. There's no point dwelling. The land was dead weight anyway. I stared at her. Dead weight. The land that fed us. Sustained us. Protected us. Held our history. Held my safety. Dead weight. I didn't say a word. But something inside me shifted, quietly, decisively. Something strong. Something that had been dormant through months of sickness, months of vulnerability. It woke up. The building smelled of old paper and dust, the kind of place where secrets hide between files and signatures. A clerk at the front desk looked up. Can I help you? I inhaled slowly. Yes, I said. I need information about a land transfer. 12 acres registered under Daniel Mercer. The clerk nodded and went inside the back office. When he returned, he held a thick brown folder. Is this the one? Daniel nodded quietly. May I? I asked the clerk. He handed me the file. And the moment it touched my hands, I felt a heaviness settle over me, the weight of truth, waiting to be opened. I sat on a wooden bench. Daniel hesitated before sitting beside me, leaving a small space between us. My fingers trembled slightly as I opened the folder. The first page hit me like a blow. A sale deed. Signed. Sealed. Processed. Not 3 months ago. Not 2 months ago. But 6 weeks into my hospitalization, the same week Evelyn stopped visiting regularly. The same week Daniel looked particularly exhausted, as if carrying something heavy. And then I saw it. My name. My forged signature. I froze. Daniel, do you see this? He leaned over, his breath catching. That's your name. My name. I whispered. Daniel, that is not my signature. I didn't sign anything. His face went pale. I didn't know, he said. I swear I didn't know she. She. I turned to him sharply. Who is she, Daniel? He didn't answer. But he didn't have to. We both knew. I flipped to the witness page. And there it was. In neat cursive handwriting. Witness 1, Evelyn Mercer. Daniel closed his eyes. Daniel, I said slowly, painfully, did you know she forged my signature? No. He shook his head vigorously. I thought she got your consent later. She told me you agreed. She showed me papers with your signature already on them when I came in after a shift. I believed her. He sounded desperate. Broken. Childlike. And for a moment, I couldn't even be angry. Because Evelyn had raised him not to question her. She had trained him to trust her word above all else. But trust does not excuse betrayal. I continued reading. The buyer's name was next. I expected a stranger. But when I saw the name, my breath left my body. Thomas Greeley. Daniel's cousin. A man who had always lingered around the family like a stray cat waiting to claim scraps. A man known for shady deals, for buying properties at half price from vulnerable people. A man Evelyn trusted more than she trusted me. Your cousin, I said softly, staring at Daniel. She sold it to him. For how much, he whispered, barely audible. I flipped to the transaction page. The listed amount made my heart tighten. 1/3 of the land's actual value. A lifetime of security, sold at a discount. Sold in secret. Sold to someone who had no right to touch it. My throat felt tight. The room felt smaller. Daniel let out a choke sound, somewhere between pain and guilt. She told me it was the full price, he whispered. She told me there was no negotiation. She lied, I said. She lied to you. She lied to me. She lied to everyone. I kept flipping through the pages. Receipts. Stamp papers. Verification notes. Everything perfectly arranged. Everything perfectly fraudulent. There was a final page, a handwritten acknowledgement letter from me, stating I agreed to the sale. But the handwriting. It wasn't even close to mine. They hadn't even bothered to mimic it properly, and yet, someone at this office approved it. It shouldn't have passed certification, Daniel said, shaking his head. There should have been a witness independent of family. Yes, I said quietly. There should have. I looked up at the clerk, who was politely pretending not to listen. Who processed this? I asked calmly. The clerk swallowed. Officer Harrell. Of course. The one officer who had openly shared drinks with Thomas. I had seen them laughing outside a bar once, arms slung over each other like brothers. Is he here today? I asked. No, ma'am. He's on leave. Convenient. I stood slowly, closing the file. Daniel, I said, we're going home. Home. He looked confused. Why? We need to. We need to prepare, I said. For more than just a conversation. He looked frightened. Of me. Of what was coming. Of the truth he could no longer avoid. As we walked toward the exit, my legs felt steady for the first time in weeks. Something inside me had settled. A decision. A quiet, firm decision. I was done being a victim of circumstances. I was done being delicate because my body had once been weak. Weakness wasn't in my bones anymore. Weakness wasn't in my spirit. As we reached the car, Daniel opened the door for me, but I didn't get in immediately. I looked at him, really looked at him, the man who once promised to protect me. Daniel, I said softly but firmly, I am going to fight this. He opened his mouth as if to speak, then closed it. A shadow crossed his face. What about my mother? He whispered. I held his gaze. That depends, I said, on whether you want to protect her, or the truth. He froze. Because he understood, for the first time, that this wasn't just about land. This was about dignity. Law. Marriage. And a betrayal that ran deeper than money. The drive back felt longer than the drive there. Neither of us spoke. And as soon as we pulled into the driveway, Evelyn stepped out of the house. She crossed her arms. So, she asked, as though waiting to hear if I would finally accept my powerless place. I walked right past her. Calm. Silent. Unshakable. Because now, I had evidence. And I already knew my next move. Tomorrow, I would go to a lawyer. Tomorrow, I would begin the battle Evelyn hoped I was too weak to fight. But today, I would let her believe nothing had changed. Because the best part of justice is letting the guilty enjoy their illusion of victory. Right before it is taken from them, the next morning, I woke before dawn. The house was quiet except for the faint hum of the refrigerator and the distant crowing of a rooster. Evelyn's bedroom door was closed. Daniel was still asleep. Alina's soft breathing came from the room down the hall. I sat at the kitchen table, the folder from the land office in front of me. I traced my finger along the edges of the pages, reading and rereading the forged signature, the sale deed, the acknowledgement letter. Each one made my stomach twist tighter. I had a choice. I could let it go. Pretend it didn't happen. Trust that Daniel would somehow restore the balance. Pretend Evelyn didn't exist. Or I could fight. I chose the fight. Finding the right ally. I contacted a lawyer recommended by a friend of a friend, Ms. Layla Ahmed. A woman known for taking on difficult cases involving property disputes, fraud, and family deception. Her office smelled faintly of leather and coffee, the walls lined with books and files. She listened to my story without interruption, scribbling notes on a yellow pad. I want full disclosure, I told her. All documents, all witnesses. I need the sale nullified if possible. Layla nodded slowly. Her expression was calm but determined. You have a strong case. Forged signatures. Undue influence. The buyer is related. The family member is involved. These are serious violations. The court will take it seriously. I felt a flicker of hope but also apprehension. How long will this take? I asked. Months, she said. Possibly more. Family disputes are tricky. Emotionally charged. But you have proof. That gives us leverage. I left her office clutching a folder with photocopies of all my documents, my heart pounding with a mixture of fear and resolve. The first confrontation. Back home, I waited for the right moment. Evelyn was in the kitchen, humming quietly. Daniel was fixing the old gate. Alina was playing quietly in her room. I approached Evelyn slowly. Evelyn, I said softly. She turned, smile faint but wary. We're going to the lawyer, I continued. All the papers. The deeds. The signed acknowledgement. Everything. It's time to correct this. Her eyes widened. You can't, she started. I can and I will, I interrupted. You thought I was too weak. That I'd recover and quietly let this slide. But I'm not weak. And I will not let a lifetime of my family's legacy disappear. She stared at me, lips pressed tight. For the first time, I saw fear in her eyes. Not the fear of a sick daughter-in-law returning, but the fear of consequences. Daniel stepped forward hesitantly. I want to help, he said softly. I didn't turn to him immediately. But I could feel his sincerity. I hope so, I said. Because this isn't just about the land. It's about trust. It's about honesty. And it's about making sure Alina knows her mother doesn't let injustice slide. Gathering evidence. The next few weeks were grueling. Layla and I collected everything: copies of the forged deed, witness statements, proof of the undervalued sale price, communications between Evelyn and Thomas Greeley, and bank transfer records. Every detail mattered. I spent nights awake, scanning documents, double-checking dates, and making sure nothing could be dismissed in court. I also began quietly talking to neighbors and the local farming community. Mr. Hahn, our longtime tenant, became a crucial witness. He confirmed that no new agreement had been signed with Thomas, and that he had been forced off the land without notice. Every conversation, every piece of evidence built a case that was irrefutable. And every time I spoke to someone outside the house, Evelyn's gaze followed me. She knew the tide was turning. The emotional toll. Even as I prepared for the legal battle, the emotional weight was crushing. Daniel sometimes seemed distant, caught between loyalty to his mother and his wife. Alina didn't fully understand why our home felt tense, why Mommy was angry more often than not. And Evelyn, she became unpredictable. Sometimes cold, sometimes trying to charm me, sometimes outright confrontational. I learned to steel myself. To listen but not react. To act but not be drawn into petty arguments. It wasn't easy. Some nights I cried alone in my room, letting the tears fall freely. Not just for the land but for the betrayal, for the loss of innocence, for the realization that people we trust most can sometimes hurt us the deepest. But even in my tears, I felt a spark of resolve. I was fighting not just for property, but for my dignity, for Alina's future, and for the truth. The court summons. Finally, the summons arrived. Evelyn's shock was palpable when I showed it to her. "Why are you dragging this to court?" she demanded. "It's done." "Why make it worse?" "Because done doesn't mean right," I said calmly. "And because justice isn't optional. You chose to break the law. Now you'll face the consequences." Daniel didn't speak, but I saw him shrink slightly, as though realizing the full gravity of the situation. That night, I lay awake thinking about the months to come. Court sessions. Depositions. Witnesses. Evelyn's lies. Thomas Greeley's scheming. It wouldn't be easy. But for the first time since leaving the hospital, I felt in control. And control, I realized, was the first step toward healing. The morning of the first hearing, I felt a mix of nerves and determination. The courtroom smelled of polished wood and paper. Sunlight streamed through tall windows, glinting off brass fixtures. It was quiet, tense, almost sacred in its own way. Evelyn arrived first, sharp and composed on the outside, but her eyes betrayed her unease. Thomas Greeley sat beside her, smug, confident that no court would overturn what he had gained. Daniel followed silently behind me, avoiding eye contact. Layla whispered a few instructions: stay calm, answer only what's asked, and let the evidence speak. Opening statements. The prosecutor began, laying out the case. Forged signatures on the sale deed. Undervaluation of property for personal gain. Fraud and undue influence by a family member. Evelyn and Thomas tried to interject, claiming legitimacy. But Layla countered expertly, presenting the land office documents, witness testimonies from Mr. Hahn, and the discrepancy in sale value. The judge's eyes flicked between the papers, Evelyn and me. I felt a wave of relief, the weight of months of preparation resting on these moments. Witness testimony. First, Mr. Hahn spoke. His voice was strong, steady, despite the intimidation from Evelyn and Thomas. They forced me off the land without notice, he said. The sale deed was presented as signed by the rightful owners, but I know the mother-in-law forged the signature. Next, Daniel took the stand. His voice shook, but he told the truth. How Evelyn manipulated him, how he believed her, how he regretted not checking the papers sooner. Evelyn tried to argue, her voice sharp, defensive, but the proof was undeniable. The handwriting analysis confirmed the forgery. Bank transfers traced directly to Thomas Greeley, showing the underpaid sale price. Every lie they had carefully constructed crumbled in the face of evidence, the verdict. Finally, after hours of testimony, the judge called for a decision. I sat upright, heart pounding. Evelyn sat rigid, hands clenched. Thomas's smug expression faltered. Daniel's face was pale, regret written in every line. The court finds that the sale deed was obtained through fraud and undue influence, the judge declared. The transaction is null and void. The property will be restored to the rightful owners, Daniel Mercer, and my name. I felt my body release months of tension in an instant, a mixture of relief, vindication, and exhaustion. Evelyn didn't speak. She simply stared, her face pale. Thomas looked like he might argue, but the judge's gavel silenced him. Daniel turned to me, tears brimming. "I'm so sorry," he whispered. I nodded. "We fixed this together." The land was returned to us, though the process of reclaiming it, repairing it, and re-establishing trust took months. Evelyn moved into a small apartment nearby, forced by the family to leave the house she had manipulated for years. Our relationship remained strained, distant, but no longer toxic. Daniel and I rebuilt our marriage on honesty. I insisted on managing finances more closely, not out of mistrust, but to ensure transparency. And Alina learned that standing up for what's right sometimes requires courage and persistence, rebuilding life. I returned to tutoring, expanding the work into a small community learning center. The farmland became productive again, leased only to trustworthy farmers. The harvests came in steadily, feeding our family and rebuilding financial stability. More importantly, I rebuilt my inner life. Months of sickness and betrayal had left scars, but also strength. I learned to trust my instincts, to assert my boundaries, and to value my voice. The house, once tense and hollow, became warm again. The smell of home-cooked meals filled the air. The laughter of Alina returned to the rooms. Even the mango tree swayed more brightly in the sunlight, as if cheering on our resilience, reflections. Sitting under the tree one evening, watching Alina chase a butterfly, I thought about all that had happened. The betrayal had been deep, personal, painful. But it had also revealed my own strength. I realized that justice isn't always swift, but standing up for what's right gives it power. That sometimes, the people closest to us can hurt us the most, but facing the truth is the only way to reclaim our dignity. I thought about Evelyn and Thomas, and I felt no joy in their downfall, only the quiet satisfaction that truth prevailed. And I thought about you, listening to my story. How far would you go to protect your family? To fight for what's right? To stand even when the world seems to have turned against you? Because that is what life asks of us, not revenge, not hatred, but courage, integrity, and the strength to rebuild. Would you have done what I did? Tell me in the comments. If you want to hear more real-life stories of betrayal, justice, and redemption, subscribe and join our journey.